Yo, check this out. This is Wayne Wonder, representing for Warieka LTV. You see the vision, don't it? See the vision. Warieka LTV. Keep it locked.
Now, I'm gonna tell you. We, us as bloggers, these are the issues that we need to address. You understand what I say? You see? Set the path for the youth. Share, like, and subscribe and stay tuned to the channel. I don't know all this. Yes, I. Once the great things in the mighty name of His Imperial Majesty Emperor Selassie I first, you know? Yeah, welcome our viewers and subscribers. See, now if you just view the thing and I go through, you know, see it. Very nice if you press the subscribe button and also the notification bell so that you can get some highlights when the new video is being uploaded. So, we'll continue with a very interesting read from the book, PT2. You know, see it? Yes, I. Miss Ilma Smith, big up yourself. Yeah, I love the enthusiasm and I respect the input. You know, see it, give thanks. Yeah. Where the AI and I do a video where I, you know, reach out some ideas to Shorty and, you know, do you don't know the general acknowledge the input. You know, see it? Yeah. You know, see it. Vibes can't tell himself. So then I give thanks still. You know, see it? Yes, I the boss himself. One of the boss know say, I use a great mind, average mind and small mind, you know. And I want to say it's the time when you do that interview there, I say it's quite a while back, you know, make I stop and think as a whole heap, you know, when them used to ingrain them thing there, you know, when we are grow up, when we are come through school still. You know, see it? Yes, I. See, so welcome all viewers and subscribers, like I say, and we will continue with a very interesting read and look into what going on, you know. Oh, what the prison system is like. I think it has changed much since them time, you know, see it. So we could continue, chapter 2, named Babylon. See? Babylon is not a place or a person. It is a thing, a socio-political system that enables the ruling class within the society to dominate, oppress, repress, and exploit the weaker class by reasons of force. The penal system, with its 7 prisons scattered across the island, is a prime strong-arm apparatus of Babylon control. When Christopher Columbus intruded upon Jamaica, he did not find a single goal on the island. The Arawak society was so structured that there was never any need for such institution of social control. There was a society of communalism where all land and the means of production belonged to the community. Although land was allocated to people, they were never free to do as they liked with it, as it belonged to the community and served the communal interest. It was only when the Europeans sought to impose his will on the indigenous people that a clash of interests along clear-cut class line happened on the island. The European was committed to the subjugation of the Arawak and the capture of their land on the one hand, while the Arawak on the other hand was committed to maintenance of his freedom and land. Using superior weapons, trained dogs and 700 mercenary cutthroats, one day Scoville conquered the Arawaks and made them slaves. However, it was one thing to do battle with and gain victory over unarmed people, but an entirely different, more difficult thing to maintain the defeated as slaves organized for capital exploitation. Society at this rudimentary stage being split into irreconcilable opposites due to the insoluble contradiction of interests signaled the birth of Babylon. Ostensibly, Babylon was established to moderate and keep class antagonism and struggles within bounds, acting as a power standing above society. Groups of unarmed men, police, gaolers and soldiers, and prisons for the incarceration of the more desperate and freedom-loving slaves who were organized to perpetuate the supremacy of Babylon. The first notion of the state came from the Europeans because they, by reasons of violence, gained dominion over the Arawaks and set themselves up as masters. Because as the constables, gaolers, judges were Europeans and all the prisoners black, and the socio-political structure was founded on European tradition. It was the Europeans' interests that were protected and served by the organized force of Babylon. You know, it's surprising how this book was written so long and it feels so current today. You see? Yeah, because nothing not changed really. You see, yeah. By 1655, another set of Europeans captured the island from the Spanish captors. The coming of the English, however, did not affect the status of the slaves in that early Jamaican society. The English took up where the Spaniards left off, setting themselves up as the new masters, claiming ownership of the means of production and slaves, not as people, but as a factor of production. Plantocracy was perfected and Babylon expanded and armed with new techniques of oppressing and repressing the already oppressed class. The cardinal precept upon which colonial government of the day was supported was fear, a total and coercive necessity systematically promulgated by the ruling class that superseded all questions of right or wrong or even sentiments of humanity. A fear that made violent minds drain away resolve and erode optimism for liberal survival among the oppressed class. A fear of Babylon with its guns, courts, gallows and prisons, fear of captivity and death. It was only by this absolute fear, this awesome power of Babylon, that it was possible for so large a number of people to be the slaves of a few. County goals and prisons sprang up all over the island, and all the bloody paraphernalia of colonialism was imported to increase the fear through torture, pain, suffering, and confinement in the dungeons, euphemized as prisons. Emancipation turned loose hundreds of thousands of ex-slaves into society, temporarily threatening the status quo. No longer did universal conscience support physical slavery. By then, however, the European colonialists had integrated into the fabric of the society the means by which to continue the perpetration of their rule. It was only a matter of time before these ex-slaves, these genesis of the modern Jamaican working class, became the wage slaves of the European masters who still own the means of production. In this post-emancipation society, social stratification developed as people began to pursue different socio-political interests. These involved the division of people into classes according to who was able to obtain control of the monopoly of the use of force through Babylon in exploiting and repressing the working class. Since this post-emancipation era, Jamaican society has operated along a strict capitalist order, wherein the exploitation of man by man, of one class by the other, renders crime and violence a permanent feature of the society. The fact that an expanding Babylon function in the society to protect the ruling class haves from the unemployed and working class have-nots is the true reason why the goals have always been filled with poor working class black people. It is indicative that just 7 years after emancipation, the largest slave market on the island was tailored into what is today the island's largest prison, the General Penitentiary. You see it. And it's still there significantly. So when you walk in, that is like you walk back in time. You walk hundreds of years back in time, man. Hundreds of years back in time. And you can't see, no, you can't see over the wall. So it's like, you know, you see it. Yes, Rasta. Yeah, man. The development of trade and industry further accentuated the differences in the interests of these classes and saw the working class struggling in earnest, attempting seriously to overthrow Babylon. Paul Boger's attempt in 1865 did not achieve this objective, and the nationalist aspiration was contained until 1938. But even then, Bustamante and Manley did not liberate the working class. 1962 came with its new flag, anthem, and Declaration of Independence. When the fireworks and celebrations were done, the butter was on the same side of the bread. Same exploitation, same class rule, same Babylon, same death row. Somebody in the next cell was knocking on the wall. Who was it? What time was it? Hurriedly I responded, then went to lie peering under the door. It was a brother I had known from my days on remand. He was knocking to tell me that Winston was okay, expressed his condolences, and warned that the warder on duty would not hesitate to open the ward and brutalize us if he heard any sound coming from the ward. With a promise that we would wrap first thing come morning, I retired to share the mattress with the parasites that nested there. Chinks. God. You see my mattress, well, boy, mattress worse, Rasta. At one point in the night, I suddenly awoke. Bugs were crawling and biting all over my body, while cockroaches crawled to and fro from cracks in the floor. Hastily, I rolled the mattress into the corner, most infested by the insects. Taking off my clothes, I hung them on the ventilator, turning my empty slop pail over in the corner, farthest away from the infested mattress, and settled down to await the morning. Until daybreak, I sat on that bucket looking at the night under the door. A black cat made frequent trips along the ward, pausing on each occasion to peep green-eyed at me. With my mind's feet, I trod through the preceding chapters of my life, dwelling upon the few pockets of happiness, consciously avoiding the sequence of unhappiness that had beset my life for as long as I could remember. Meticulously, I examined and re-examined expressions of commitments others had pledged, commitments I had made to others and myself. Would friends and family abandon my cause now when I needed all the friends and help? Would my body and soul endure the rigors, physical and psychological demands and trauma of this great predicament? Only time would tell. The fact of the moment was that standing in the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Dawn was breaking at least, that there would be another day. Chapter 3, see, another day. Yo, another day. Before the sun came over the prison walls, the day had begun. Gradually, the clean air of the night was assaulted by the rising stink of the prison, while the grinding and clanging of the metal brakes and locks shattered the last impression of nocturnal tranquility as the trustees and slaves were unlocked. The bugs and cockroaches had disappeared, leaving only the scratch bumps all over my body and a few dead cockroaches scattered across the floor as sign of their night's activities. This morning was bare and prosaic. There was no soap and water to wash my face, no toothbrush or toothpaste to brush my teeth, no transistor reader to check the news. This morning was unlike mornings, not like mornings ought to be. Mornings were for hope, but my ration of that had finished yesterday. As promised, the brother in the next cell and I began to rap early. He put me wise on the rules and regulations that govern the prison and the inherent norms of day-to-day survival. Whatever the brother omitted then, I lived and learned in the days to come. Special rules apply to the custody of prisoners on death row as distinct from those applicable to the general prison population. In totality, these rules explicitly reflected the stringency of confinement which this functionary of Babylon forcefully imposed on working class Jamaicans in contemporary times, and the systematic oppression, debasement, dehumanization, and psychological torture inherent in the policies and functioning of the penal system. No books, newspaper, magazines, pencils were permitted on the row. No toothpaste, brush, soap, comb, bath towel, or toilet paper was allowed inside the cells. No cutlery, underwears, photograph, transistor radio, or even a Bible was permitted on the row. No communication with prisoners outside in the general population or even fellow prisoners on the row was permitted. No cigarettes, spectacles, or jewelry of any kind was permitted on the row. We were allowed 2 visits weekly and to write 1 letter over the same period. They would shove the letterhead and a stump of pencil under the door and return 5 minutes later to bang on the door for its receipt. All mails received had to be promptly read and returned to the warder, and all mails received had to be promptly read and returned to the warder. Any and all of these provisions could be instantly revoked at the caprice of any warder. The prisoners are assured only of the garbage they are served for food, nothing else. Try to buck the system and you will be quickly introduced to the business end of a riot button, rules of fear. This confinement and the fact that the rules further increase the onus of pressure by outlawing any conventional deviation is an act of psychological torture. True, the process has never been ironed out into a discipline, yet over the years it has plundered the human estate and allowed full expression to those freaks of nature whose degrade life itself and spit upon humanity. The technique is based on the theory that man is but a product of his culture, that if man is deprived of the material aspect of his culture, the already disturbed man brain forced the regimented silence and the absence of conventional deviation into gradually reducing its activities, is tortured further as the non-activity of the mind increases. The nervous system gradually falls apart as the confinement intensifies and protracts. A man learns survival and adapts his behaviors from the culture that surrounds him. In our culture, even the poorest of the land eat with some items of cutlery from clean plates, have a bath and change when dirty, wear underclothes, comb their hair and sleep on a bed, broken as it may be, and even now and again wear shoes. On the row, you eat with your fingers from foul-smelling diet tins. When you are through, you push it out under the door. You stay dirty and stink until some warders decide to permit a bath and issue a change of clothes. Sleep on a floor mattress, wear no shoes, so that every occasion the man reflects on his predicament, which means all the while the inevitable comparison routine surfaces. Where would I be now were I outside? Look where I am now. And meal times, imagine how I used to eat around the table and look at this. Apply even more pressure when he asks for a haircut. Scrape his head. Threaten him daily with the might and power of the baton, guns, barbed wire, and gallows. Remind him every morning and evening how certain his death on the gallows is. Bust his knee with the baton for any 10-cent reason. Keep him on edge. Poke at his soul, tear down the structures of his personality, deculturize him. Soon you won't have a man. he will have been transformed into a freak like Lawrence Sinclair, Hadley Grant, Ford, or the others who freaked out under the onus of this torture. Why Vibes Cartel go and hold the meds, yeah, the general. Go and hold the meds, you have failed it all long so far, but the system never set for nothing where nothing positive, you know, see. Silence is golden, but if a sufficiently disturbed individual is in total silence, and that silence is systematically enforced over a long period, the already disturbed individual will inevitably suffer mental aberration of no small degree. 4 locks on the door, a bug-filled mattress, a couple of mugs, a shit bucket, and time, more time, seemingly endless time, sitting empty-eyed, standing because they are tired of sitting, consideration, frustration, silence, time, silence, the death sentence, time. At first, the mind finds deviation in any triviality of the moment. After a while, even the deviation becomes tedious and more difficult to identify, so you begin to backpedal in time, that being easier to face than the precarious future. After a while, the law of diminishing returns set in, and there is no further back to go and still no way forward. At this point, you enter limbo, staring at the walls as if to discover something that wasn't there yesterday, cleaning your nails that you just cleaned 10 minutes ago, trying to hide in sleep. At first, sleep is indeed a pleasant interlude. Then even in sleep comes less, and is no longer a pleasant interlude, but a horror-filled period of nightmares and dreams from which you awaken frightened and sweat-soaked. So you begin to shy away from sleep, and the mind becomes more difficult to control. You are surprised to find yourself thinking out loud, singing offbeat tunes with rhythm only for your ears. Finally, you recognize the awesome truth that the most important task of every moment is to keep a firm hold on your mind. If not, you are going to get kinky, and Babylon will still hang you easier then. So you forcibly program yourself from daybreak to unlock. You attend to the cleaning of your cell. From breakfast till midday meal, you exercise or spend the time hunting cockroaches and bugs. After the midday meal, you use the occasion of the warder's absence to have a rap with the brother in the next cell. From when the staff return until evening meal, you spend the time peering across at number 1 block at the happenings there. After the next meal and the departure of day staff, it is consideration until sleep comes. The confinement on the ROW was, except for 3 minutes each morning, total, every morning, anywhere between 8 and 10, we were unlocked. In these 3 minutes, one had to empty the accumulated waste, wash the bucket, fill a supply of water, wash one's face and brush one's teeth right there at a small cistern, leaving the toothbrush, soap, and paste in a box where everyone else kept theirs. To have a clean later on, one would discreetly squeeze some paste onto the thumb and leave one hand soaked. When the ward is done, it's tea time and the door is open, only enough for one hand to reach a piece of bread from the tray and the other to shove in a mug for some cold tea. Midday meal and supper were served in similar manner, except on such occasion as a visit or search. The door remains closed. At the far end of the ward, a section of about 30 feet was walled into a dead end, housing a single bathroom and an abandoned toilet. This dead end was called Duppy City by warders and prisoners alike. The story goes that the ghosts of all those executed hung out in this corner at night. The fact that Come dusk, the water would be invaded by large fracks coming from the dead end, kept the story alive among the more sentimental. It was not the ghost of the frog that stayed fear and contempt in the hearts of prisoners when duplicity was mentioned. It was the batons, coiled wire, sadists, blood and tears that caused this fear of duplicity, serving as it did as the chamber of brutality at the prison. If a prisoner from any section of the prison was to be brutalized, he was taken to the city. Once he entered the ward and was chased into the dead end, there was no escape from the onslaught of brutality. Here we would be smashed up by any amount of warriors, many times. I heard them beat prisoners into unconsciousness and broken limbs. One guy, Davis, went insane after a session of brutality there. The daily ration of screams, brutality, and blood all over the place when he reached the cistern in the morning imposed a terrible strain on our mind. One day it suddenly struck me that I had forgotten how to smile, that I had acquired a permanent scowl. Rastafari. Runnings, you know, with that chapter 4, you know. I want to name it Runnings. I want to sound interesting. In those early days, most of the prisoners on the row were older people. They perpetrated the myth that a prisoner of the row could do nothing to influence the ultimate decision of one's case and survival. They encouraged the idea that all one ought to do was pray, sing, fast, and have faith. This formula did not appeal to the young prisoners, some of whom had been done great injustices and were inclined to be militant in their approach to survival. There was this bird, a screech owl, that happened to have a nest nearby and flew over the prison at night. Occasionally, it would fly over the row and disappear over the wall that surrounded the gallows. The elders had a thing about this bird. If while flying over the row, the bird happened to screech 3 times in quick succession, it would immediately be construed by the bird watchers as a sure indication that someone was going to be executed. If the bird made one long screech, they would all get excited, this being construed as a sign that someone on the row would get away. When they were not come like a GP. Maybe some kid that travel about GP. When they were not busy bird watching or singing or praying, they occupied themselves interpreting each other's dream. Invariably, each of them had a dream every night. Runnings is a Jamaican term for everyday activities geared to one's own survival. The younger prisoners were more concerned with the more mundane and immediate facts of their own predicament. Accordingly, our debates were around how to save our lives by any means necessary. Most of us believed, even then, that we would have to personally contribute to any relief that might be forthcoming. Babylon didn't have us packed away on the row because it was concerned with our welfare and interest. We had been selected for the gallows, bait, and any escape via the courthouse or through the ventilators and over the walls demanded more than the kid glove approach. Consequently, there was a conflict of opinion and attitude on the row between the youths and the elders. These differences, however, did not affect the comradeship shared on the row. A particular feature of our relationship on the row in those early days was the fact that you would live next cell to a man. You would reason with him for months, come to know his voice and other things about his case and self, but you would never get to know his face. You would never see him in the 3 minutes break in the morning, you weren't allowed to peep through the Judas hole of any other cell, nor could the prisoner inside the cell peep through and see the others on the wall. Not unless you wanted your face smashed. The most one could do was volunteer a description of oneself to the others. It was after almost 3 months living on the road that I got to know what the brother on both sides looked like. This was another feature of the institutionalized torture. As the days passed, I discovered a heart-rending deviation from the monotony of the row by laying on the floor with my face level with the floor ventilator. I had an undisturbed view of number 1 block. Wow. Which was directly across and ran parallel with the A1, about 50 yards away. I spent many hours, days and nights at this ventilator looking across at number 1 block, and in particular at the notorious big room and the daily run of affairs. Prisoners entering the prison, except those of our status, are often or until processing located at number 1 block. Daily I gazed across and saw the systematic degradation and dehumanization of the prison society Babylon imposed on those branded criminals and unfortunates. There is a central room for the warehousing of these prisoners, the big room. The name is an euphemism for a 26-foot by 20-foot garbage bin. I have seen them packed more than 100 young, old, sick, sane, insane, first offenders and recidivists in that room. Here, they sleep 6 men to 1 mattress. They sleep 6 men to 2 mattresses turned crossway on the floor. The heat and odor from this room are unbearable. When this room was packed solid, the surplus of human being was herded off to the south block, another garbage bin at this section. Up to 7 men were housed packed between the cells. They sleep. Up to 70 men were housed in a passage between the cells. They sleep on mattresses on the floor. 3 men to a mattress. Some stand up and sleep, and others sleep on the steps. Until then, I had never seen men sleep on beams that ran across the ceiling, and after tying themselves to secure, retire for the night. Stranger yet was the sight of dozens of prisoners bunched together sleeping on their feet. There was no toilet or running water in the big room. They gave the prisoners half an oil drum with handles on and without any cover to function as a communal latrine. Water was stored in 3 old kerosene tins, filled in the evening and used by all. Every morning, the scene was the same. Come unlock, the tougher, more bullying and violent prisoners would coerce and threaten the weaker or mentally deranged prisoners into carrying out and emptying the half drum filled with the night's waste. By the time the bearers reached the hopper in the open yard, almost all the waste was spilled all over the place, filling the morning air with the stink of shit. The trustee would arrive on the scene and curse hell out of everybody as he had to supervise the cleaning up operation. Sometimes the trustee would himself knock over the bearers with his broom, at which time the warders would intervene. Tomorrow, it would happen all over again. Often at night, I would be awakened by screams coming from the big room. Sometimes it was a homosexual trying to rape an innocent and naive young prisoner. Somebody had stolen something. A madman had overturned the communal latrine and was being mobbed, or there was a fight over possession of a blanket or a mattress. On such occasions, the warder alerted alerted, would organize a posse and proceed to beat hell out of any prisoner who had happened to be nearest to the door. This was the world I had been introduced into, where nobody cared 2 cents whether you lived or died, whether you were raped or knifed, whether you were worse or better, whether you were sane or crazy, whether you survived or went under. And it didn't matter whether you were on death row, general penitentiary, or in the big room. You were a criminal, a prisoner, a non-person to be brutalized, degraded, and subjected to all manner of oppression in the name of social security, law, order, and justice. What the punks in parliament and the big shots don't realize is that this institutionalized degradation and brutality only serve to assure the further breakdown of law and order and social security. My first exposure to death on the row was a strange affair that further served to impress upon my consciousness the severity of the situation that surrounded me. Renford Solomon was about 5'8", of dark complexion and reasonably built. He was convicted for murder of some people at Cooper's Hill in the white people's section of St. Andrew. His appeal to the Jamaica Court of Appeal was dismissed, and because of public outrage at the time, he entertained no optimistic hope. He lived 6 cells to my left at number 21 and was regarded as a soft celebrity on the ward, being the most publicized convict on the row. Early in 1972, the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council in England refused his case. The refusal was released to the news media, and when the sound hit the grapevine, Solomon was one of the first to hear. That afternoon, a cool water was working, and some of us went on the ventilator above the door, getting some fresh air and discussing Solomon's case. As it happened, the warder had a newspaper and was reading it inside the sentry box. Solomon shouted to him, asking him if there was anything about him in the papers. The warder simply held the papers so that he could see the front page. That was enough. He didn't have to say a word, for the headline said it all. Solomon's time was up. This final confirmation generated an atmosphere of tension like nothing I had ever experienced. The air was alive and throbbing with the shadow of death, and I am sure every prisoner on the row was affected. That night the elders had no singing, bird watching, or interpretation of dreams, nor did the youths discuss any politics or courthouse talk. Tonight was different, for death had polluted and hung heavy in the air, forcing every man's consciousness to his own predicament. Before daybreak, Solomon was up and very talkative, keeping up a monologue about himself and the system. After a while, he called to another prisoner on the row, about 12 cells away. Edwards had never exchanged a word with Solomon from the time he had first come to the row. They had some confrontation from before my time. Now Solomon called Edwards to tell him that he had forgiven him and asked that Edwards should do the same. After this exchange of forgiveness, Solomon slipped back into his monologue. It was the resolve to kill himself that he had been working up since before daybreak, and he was doing well. No warder was going to rejoice at his downfall. No hangman was going to make any bread off his head, and most important to him, he was going to pull the last one on Babylon. He repeated these points several times. Then he made a shocking confession. Years ago he had committed a murder, and as it turned out, an innocent man was convicted of the crime and had been executed for it. When Solomon came on the row, the innocent man, whose name was White, was alive and awaiting the result of his final appeal, and lived a couple of cells away from Solomon. Though they both shared comfortable rapport, Solomon never mentioned the murder to White for fear that White would use it to free himself and add more dirt to Solomon's grave. White was never to know what the man he had discussed this case with. White was never to know that the man he had discussed this case with, the same man who had often given him advice, was the man who had done the murder he was to die for. White was hanged in one of those executions that legends are made of. When they came for him that morning to hang him, the man was on the top of the building, stark naked, and nobody could explain just how he had got there. Most people said it was Oria. A fire unit was summoned, and he was hosed down from the roof and executed amidst lightning and pouring rain. Solomon's confession, coming when it did, could help neither White nor Solomon. All it did was to generate a deep contempt among many of us towards Solomon. The man just did not value life, nor his nor others, not his nor others. By then, he was ready to hang himself when he made the first plunge from the ventilator above the door, to which he had fixed the rope made from his blanket. The rope broke and he fell with a crash to the floor. On hearing the fall, I was inclined to believe the guy was joking. The error was mine, for he was serious, dead serious. By then, the day staff had arrived for the morning body count. Solomon was alive then, remaking his rope, and like everybody else, he responded to the shouts of hands out by putting out his arms to be counted. Thus the warder got the right muster and was none the wiser as to what was happening. If Solomon wanted to hang himself, it was his business. I couldn't decide what I'd do in similar circumstances. It was his life. As soon as the warder left, Solomon made his second and final plunge. This time the rope held. Straight away there were clear sound of his struggling. Did he decide he didn't want to die? Or was it death that he was doing battle with? First the sound were loud and insistent, then gradually it became softer, 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 silent. The silence stayed heavy and nobody had the urge to say anything. Death had passed through. Even when the morning exercise of unlock began, nobody said a word to the warder. Those let out before Solomon's door was unlocked went about business as usual. When the warder came to Solomon's door, one look was enough to send him bolting down the block. A person convicted of murder and sentenced to death may choose to pursue one of the following courses. He may, as it usually done, enter an appeal to the Jamaica Court of Appeal as the first appeal, or to the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council in London, or to our local Privy Council. An appeal to the Jamaica Court of Appeal is generally made after a conviction in the Circuit Court. Such an appeal is made in dispute on points of law that have led to conviction. This court is not concerned with whether or not a particular bit or all the evidence is true, false, or even reliable. The concern of this court is to test the propriety of the proceeding that led to conviction and ascertain if the laws were duly observed in the trial process. The appellant's case is presented here by an attorney in the absence of the appellant. An appeal to the local Privy Council is generally made after the appeal has been refused by the Jamaica Court of Appeal. Such an appeal is not made in contest to the conviction, but rather a petition for executive clemency. No attorney is allowed to represent a case before this body. Petitioning is done by the prisoner through the prison authorities to the Privy Council. An attorney or person on the outside may petition this body on the prisoner's behalf. It is generally accepted that such an appeal should indicate one's guilt first, then beg mercy. An appeal to the Judicial Committee of the Privy Council is the constitutional right of every prisoner on the row who has a case. The brothers on the row labeled it the rich man's appeal. I found it typical of the contempt for the rights of the poor and the double standard employed to disguise the class bias of the judiciary as a tool of Babylon. In accordance with the provision of the former pauperous legislation, legal aid is provided in certain of Babylon's cases at the preliminary inquiry, the circuit trial and the Jamaican Court of Appeal. The circuit trial and the Jamaican Court of Appeal. No provision is made for legal aid to attend the necessary legal affairs inherent in this appeal process. Consequently, of the odd assortment of prisoners warehoused on the row, I cannot remember 4 who were able to employ the necessary service of the process. Of the majority who couldn't enjoy the right of this appeal because of their financial status, I remember most vividly the case of Clifford Gray. Clifford, a youth in his early 20s, was convicted of a knife-slaying murder and sentenced to death. He appealed to the Jamaica Court of Appeal and his case was dismissed. In the preliminary inquiry, trial, and appeal to the Jamaica Court of Appeal, he had depended exclusively on legal aid. Now that he wanted to appeal to the Privy Council in London, he expected that the legal aid attorney who had been assigned to his case until then would attend to the necessary filing of papers. Gray was illiterate, and I wrote to his attorney for him, explaining Gray's position and asked him to attend to the papers on his behalf. The attorney promptly replied that he would file the papers for the appeal only if he was retained. When I read the letter to Gray, he broke down and wept, for neither he nor his family could come up with the cash. 2 months later, they came for Gray and executed him. How would it have ended if he had got his right to appeal? If only he had some money. By then, I had attached myself to the local grapevine and soon learned that even on death row one could get such things as cigarettes, ganja, envelopes, stamps, and writing paper if one had the bread. The foundation of the grapevine rested for the most part on determination and comradeship of the prisoners in the yard. No matter which village, city, or corner of Jamaica you were from, there was always a convict in the yard from your corner. Once he knew you were on the row and where your cell was, he'd walk past in the yard and shout you any bit of important news. If you had got money, he'd buy your stuff and risk the judgment of a riot button to get it to you on a line. As soon as anything important broke, we'd be the first to hear. Some of them were classes as trustees and informers, but this didn't stop them from posting letters for us and passing us information. One guy in particular was a dangerous informer who was feared by the prisoners in the yard. Yet this same guy, because he was so close to the authorities as an informer, was the first to reach me with any news of importance. A most peculiar feature of our relationship was the convicts in the yard was the notion that was at its base. A most peculiar feature of our relationship with the cons in the yard was the notion that was at its base. If a prisoner on the row was innocent and this fact was validated by the street words, they would collectively sympathize with his situation and as such would take serious risks to make life less miserable for him on the row and to beat the rap. If the prisoner was guilty of the crime, depending on the nature of the crime, they related to him as if he was a little different from them. The fact that they were collectively opposed to capital punishment did not alter the contempt and disgust they held for prisoners on the row who had done certain kinds of murders. You see? Yeah. Morality. Yes, let me get back to this. For instance, public opinion in the prison was against those prisoners on the row who had committed infanticide, rape, and murder, or murder committed to gain possession of a woman. Feelings also ran against ex-policemen or ex-security guards. Although this line of morality promulgated by prison opinion was not necessarily consistent with that of the broader society, it was nonetheless important to our existence and survival on the row, as it determines whether or not your illegal mails were posted, your contraband purchased and trafficked to you, or whether or not the trustee posted passed on money from your visitor to you. Most important, this public opinion determined whether or not the trauma of your predicament was further increased by the contempt and disgust, or significantly decreased by the assistance and comradeship of the community. There was this ultra sadist known as the Funk, who was the terror of death row. I had often seen him pass by and heard from other prisoners on the row gory tales of his capacity for degradation and sadism. He always went about the prison with his selected trustee, a notorious pencil-thin rapist homosexual, a few steps behind him. The Funk and his lackey in appearance presented a picture that would be an asset to the most bizarre horror movie. The Funk had some kind of illness that compelled him to spit every second. It didn't matter whether he was in his office or on the ward. He just had to spit. True to his sadistic nature, the Funk just loved to spit on prisoners. Consequently, at his approach, anywhere in the yard, prisoners would scurry from his path. Some said he spat so much because a prisoner from the condemned cell had broken his jaw in a struggle before he was executed, and that the Funk's jawbone was reinforced by a foreign material that causes him to spit so much. Whatever the cause, the Funk just had to spit. Occupying the rank of overseer, the Funk was in charge of the upkeep of the gallows and general welfare of the prisoners on the row. He saw to it that death machine was kept oiled and turned, that the graves were dug and the coffins prepared, that the sacrificial victims were ready, and he was a permanent feature of the institutionalization torture proceeding at the prison. It was his favorite boast that he had arranged and supervised the execution of more than 60 prisoners convicted of murder and would eventually make his century. I was a potential addition to his quota. One morning, just before the midday meal, my meditation was broken by the opening of the lock on the door. Since I had heard no knocking on the wall, I knew it wasn't a visit. I was wondering what the occasion was when the door opened. I was wondering what the occasion was when the door opened to reveal a Funk standing there as large as life and ugly as sin. If Satan should desire appropriate human form, the Funk was the best. Jump out, ordered one of the warders who accompanied him. The Funk stood there staring at me through bloodshot eyes. Nobody said anything, and I wasn't about to make a speech. The Funk spat on the ward. Nothing said. Nobody said anything. Silence, another spit. What religion you belong to, son? He asked, toning down the gravel in his voice to a level unbecoming of his grotesque appearance. I don't belong to any particular one, sir. That's good, he replied, then spat. That is very good. You believe in reincarnation? No, sir. That's good, man. That's good. In a voice that suddenly became hard and threatening, for when I broke your fucking neck, you going nowhere except behind the kitchen. His eyes were twinkling now as the accompanying water broke into toothy grin at my conspicuous discomfort. You see me, boy, as if I could miss his ugly mug. Look at me, for I going to be the last face you see on earth. I am going to be your judgment. He paused to spit and emit a squeak he constructed as a laugh. Don't bother make up your face and fret, cause I won't hurt you. Another spit. You see? Like how you're slim, I will give you the right amount of chain and weight. And you won't feel a thing. Another spit. It's how much people you kill, boy, he asks. I kill no one, sir. Alright. It's how much people them say you kill. One, sir. Well, you go and pay for it with your life, and no matter how much people you kill or how bad you is, once you go on my plane, the gallows, one time you're gone. Another spit. We soon meet, boy, turning away. And don't fret, cause you're not going to feel any pain at all. Lock him down. Yes, sir. So we have chapter 5 next, you know. We have up on chapter 5 named Gibraltar. You see, the experience is very moving, Rasta. It have me, you know, stuttering at points and stopping, cause like I said, and I learn along the way, just like the item Rasta, about the death row and the experience, you know. So not for it is mind jarring even to I and you know, concerning. So I give thanks. Share, like, and share that one here, share that one here. You don't know. Share, like, and subscribe, people. See? I make a reach to the 10,000 now, man. Wow, help me get the first platinum, man. When I go on, so I go on, because one of the people I'm fine, we can kick we out first before we get something from them. Respect my family. Share, like, and subscribe.